8 a.m. last day, and then the topic of the session is design patterns demystified. I actually was a little bit upset that the directions committee asked me to demystify design patterns. Come on guys, we've been talking about design patterns for how long? 5 years, 6 years? I wrote a book about it. Who has my book on design patterns? Good. Okay, so if you have heard me talk about design patterns before, this is probably going to be a recap. The directions folks explicitly asked me to talk about it again. There's going to be a lot of GP partners here, SL partners that are not familiar with AL. So I'm going to repeat. Eleni, you've been in a workshop, so this will be a recap for you. It's like trying to put all the goodies from the masterclass into 1 hour, right? So let me start by asking you a question. Who recognizes this building? Everyone here from the US? Anyone from Europe? Okay. So I'm from Holland. So this is a Dutch building. This is the building where our Dutch government tries to work. It's in The Hague. Our government doesn't work in Amsterdam. Amsterdam has been hijacked by the tourists. They force us to walk around there in wooden shoes and eat cheese and stuff like that to look nice. So the government is in The Hague, and this building has been around for a long time. I think the first version of the building was built in 1200 or something like that, when the Indians were just running around here with their tents. And this building has a couple of similarities with NAV and design patterns. The similarity with design patterns is not the fact that all the windows are nicely in a pattern. It's actually that this building is quite old. The government has been in the building forever, but currently the building needs to be fixed up. Not on the outside looks very pretty and tourists will take pictures of it, but the inside is kind of like 1950s, 1960s. I don't know if you've ever been to Redmond with Microsoft and you visit one of the old buildings at Microsoft. It's kind of the same atmosphere, right? So it needs to be fixed up. They have two options. The first option is that everybody just completely abandons the building for the next 5 years, and then the workers can do their work. They can make all the noise they want. No one's going to complain about the noise. And then after 5 years, everybody gets back, and the building will be fixed up. But everybody will have to adjust to the new building. The canteen will be somewhere else. The toilets will be somewhere else. Everything works in a different way. So everybody needs to kind of learn how everything works. The alternative option is that for 12 years, people just move around within the building, and then the constructors will slowly but surely start to fix up the internal of the building. That way, you will probably, if you are doing your work, maybe if the construction guys are making a lot of noise, you can hear them drilling or breaking something. You will run into the construction guys every now and then. Maybe you try to go to your toilet and the toilet is closed, you have to go to a different toilet. And that's kind of the same with NAV. NAV Navision has been with us for the last 3 decades. And within Navision we also had a couple of major overhauls, you know. We went from DOS to Windows, we went from the native database to the SQL database to the rotated client. Now we're moving to the web client, we're moving from hard code modifications to extensions. And I think the good thing is that the Navision guys, the people who build Navision for us, they never really ask us to completely leave the product and then come back after they're finished. And we don't recognize the product and we have to redo all our modifications. They've always allowed us to just keep running around in Navision while they are fixing everything up. But that actually means that every now and then you will actually hear the guys doing their work. And sometimes you will get a version of Navision and you're like, this is not really finished yet. Yeah, That's true, you know, but that's the idea, you know. Everyone, who put a customer live on the first version of the role to the client? Ooh, that was not a nice version, right? Who did like a very early SQL Server migration from native to SQL? Ooh, yeah. Not a happy customer, right? So, another comparison between this building and Navision is that this building is too big to maintain by yourself. When Navision got started, I started with Navision Financials 1.1. Back then you could do everything. You could install the product, you could be the consultant, you could be the developer, you make all the changes, you go live, you do support, you know, you become the person that the customer trusts. You can't do that with Navision anymore, right? It's too big. I mean, I don't know how to handle IIS, you know, if it works, if it doesn't work, I have to call Arend Jan or Waldo, you know, those guys know how that works. So, the same is with this building, you know, there's a team of guys maintaining it. And those guys have rules, because if you don't have rules, you're going to confuse the guy who comes in after you. A plumber has rules. A plumber, when they have cold and warm water, one goes to one side and the other one goes to the other side. And if the next plumber goes in to do maintenance or to fix something, they don't have to think about what the guy did. They have rules. And I think if you work in projects with teams, you need to have rules. You cannot make up your own rules. Who has ever been into a database that someone else implemented, that someone else did modifications? And you were like, oh my God, how drunk was this guy when he wrote those modifications, right? One of the reasons I started with design patterns was that about 10 years ago I did a lot of performance tuning. And back then I saw like a different Navision database every day. And I was like, oh my God, really? I was taught Navision development like 20 years ago, when some of the founding fathers of Navision were still around, and I was taught there was a philosophy and the design behind Navision. And I really got the idea that this whole design and this whole philosophy was getting lost. And that's how I got around to starting my books, and that's, I think, one of the main reasons I'm still standing here, because I strongly believe in those rules, because those rules will help us to be more efficient. And if we are more efficient, then we have more happy customers, because it becomes easier to help and serve the customers. Last, but definitely not least, last comparison, and I'll stop talking about buildings. When they built this building in 1200, those guys probably did not expect the building to survive for 1,000 years, right? And that's the same with NAV. When guys like Michael Nielsen created Navision and invented the CAL programming language, they expected CAL to survive for 3 years, 4 years. I mean, how many programming languages are there? Hundreds? Thousands? How many programming languages really like survive and become brand names? You know, like C#, Delphi. I mean, how many programming languages really make it and survive? And CAL has now been with us for 3 decades, but nobody expected CAL to survive, right? And for a long time, Navision was not on full maintenance mode. You know, when Microsoft was working on Project Green, they were intending of replacing all the ERP systems with one. And back then, not a lot happened to NAV. Kind of a scary feeling right now as well. So, okay. So, I think in order to maintain something that has an existing context, you need to have rules and structure. If you don't have those rules, you'll have chaos. Everybody is doing it in their own way. Above everything else, we need to have communication. And I think this is also where design patterns are a big help. What we're going to do, what we do with design patterns is, with design patterns we label stuff. And the benefit of labeling stuff, it becomes easier to talk about stuff. If I go to the zoo with my kids, it's really beneficial that the animals have names, right? Otherwise, we go and say, oh, there's this animal with a long neck, you know, and there's this like big other animal, or it's an elephant, and all of the other animals are non-elephants. You know, to label stuff makes it easier to communicate about it, right? So that's another thing that we're going to do with design patterns. So we compare software development with building. I think one of the main differences between building a house or building a bridge or doing plumbing is I don't have to be a plumber to see that this guy here took a shortcut. And I really feel like terrible for the guy who has to maintain this if this starts to work out bad, you know. And I think this picture here is what we call a performance issue. Everything looks really nice on paper, and then we go live, and shit hits the fan, right? What I would like, you know, after this session, that you will be able to open a Navision database, open an object like a table or a code unit, and you see that object, and you're like, you're laughing because you will recognize something bad from something good. This is one of my favorite quotes, one from Michael Nielsen. Michael is the creator of CAL, the father of CAL. He doesn't work at Microsoft anymore, he left Microsoft 2 years ago. But this is something that he said 10 years ago. 10 years ago was the time when we moved from the classic database to the role-tailored client. And when we moved from the classic database to the role-tailored client, we had to convert all of our form objects to page objects. And the idea when we moved from forms to pages was we're going to introduce a three-tier system. And if you have a three-tier system, all the business logic is going to run on a tier that doesn't have any UI. In NAV we have UI objects, and in the classic client it was possible to write business logic on the UI. So if we move to a three-tier, wouldn't it be nicer to say, okay, on a page object, you cannot write anything that modifies to a database? Because if you don't write any business logic on a page, you don't have to invent any mechanism that will take that business logic from the UI and move it to the service tier. Great idea. Then Microsoft started to look at their own code, and I'll show you an example in a minute. And even in their own code, there was like a whole bunch of CAL code that was running business logic on the UI. So they said, no, that's probably not a good idea to not support it. So Microsoft today is still supporting to have business logic on the UI. It's not a good idea, you know, it's not good to do it, right? And I think this is, for me, was one of the big eye-openers. When I started to do Navision programming 20 years ago, I always thought that, you know, if I program the same way as Navision is programming, I'm always good. No, the guys who build Navision are mere mortals, human beings, just like you and me, and they make mistakes, you know, and not everything that you find in the NAV product is perfect, you know. This is kind of an awkward slide today at this event, but let's go through it anyway. About 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the way that Navision was shipped, every 3 years, 2, 3 years, sometimes 4 years, we would get a big version of NAV. And with a big version of NAV, I mean that we get a version that a partner needs to merge their code, they need to look at their modifications, they need to say, okay, did I do a modification that is now replaced by a standard feature? You know, every 3 years we had to go through that cycle. You know? And with NAV 2013, that cycle changed. We got yearly releases. Every year we got a big release. Don't be fooled by the R2 in 2013 R2. 2013 R2 had a bunch of new features that you had to look at. The R2 is only like a marketing way of going around the CFMB certification. The reason why I say it's a weird slide is that I was really hoping that we would get NAV 2018 now, so it's kind of weird that feels like we're getting out of this yearly release cycle, probably by accident, not by design, but anyway. If you only have to merge every 3 years, Or maybe as a partner or a customer, you decide to skip a version. If you skip a version and Microsoft only releases every 3 years, your customers will only upgrade every 7 years, right?
Or 10.
If you only upgrade or merge your code every 3 years or every 7 years, then merging is not a bad thing. When I first started to attend Directions 10 years ago, nobody complained about merging, you know? Merging is not a big deal if you don't have to do it that often. And if you have to merge your own code every 3 years, it's probably actually good that you actually look at your stuff and like, ooh, did I wrote that 3 years ago? Maybe I should like make a quick change. But now if you get like a big release every year, then you will find yourself merging at least every 12 months. And on top of that, Microsoft has introduced this roll-up update mechanism that if you find a bug in a vision in the old days, let's say that you find something in manufacturing and something doesn't go well with routing. 10 years ago, 8 years ago, you would like get a code snippet from Microsoft, and Microsoft would just put this code snippet in and everything will work, right? Now if you report a bug, Microsoft will still fix it, actually got better at fixing it. But they will say, your stuff is fixed in rollup update 5. And they will not tell you what they changed. They just say, implement rollup update 5, right? Which is nice because then you can say your customer is on rollup update 5 and it's more stable than, yeah, my customer is running on AV 2013 with this like modification from Microsoft. So it's easier from a support perspective. But now we find ourselves merging during the project. And you look at your business card, and your business card used to say, I'm a developer. And you have to throw away your business card and buy a new one and say, I'm a professional software merger, right? Nobody wants to have that business card. Right? I actually had one guy in my class once, he said, I like to merge. Okay, I'm sorry, you lost your job. Right? And with Dynamics 365, they take it to the next step. With Dynamics 365, Microsoft just ships features when they are ready, right? And if Microsoft just ships functional features, table changes, schema changes, whenever they are ready, as a Navision partner, there's no way to merge against that, right? It's going to be hell, right? So with this model, we can't merge anymore, right? So we have to see if we can fix that. This is a phrase that I learned when I did this talk. I did a masterclass in Tokyo. This is called, does anyone know what it says? No. It says shogunai. And shogunai is what the Japanese people say, you can't do anything about it, accept the situation as it is. You know, you're waiting for the bus, you miss the bus, shogunai. It rains, put up an umbrella, shogunai. Don't complain about it. Nothing can be done about it, you know. And that's the same with, you know, moving to this new model with more frequent releases. You can like it, you can not like it, but it's not something that Microsoft is doing, it's something that the customer is driving. If you talk to customers today, the requirements of customers is changing more frequently than it used to be in 10 years ago. 10 years ago they bought an ERP system and they expected it to just live for 10 years. But now everything is connected, everything is with APIs, and the sales guy will come to you and say, oh, I just landed a new prospect and I need an EDI interface. Can you build me an EDI interface? Like, yeah, I can do that, but the guy wants to have JSON and we're running on an AV 2009. I can't do JSON and have to like build something in C# to convert it to an XML for an XML port, you know? So the world is moving in a faster pace and customers want to be on the latest and greatest technology. People want to work from home and stuff like that, right? So design patterns. The definition of a design pattern is a best practice to solve problem. This is again a quote from Michael. Design patterns have always been the secret source of NAV. Navision has always been full of design patterns. The only thing that nobody ever did was to actually go in and document these patterns. But the guys who built Navision in the 1980s, they actually did the same thing. If you know how to build or create a customer in NAV, you know how to create a vendor. If you know how to create a purchase invoice, you know how to create a service invoice, right? Everything works the same way, everything is very consistent, and if you apply that consistency in your own application, it becomes easier for both your customers to use your software and also for other developers to use your code. So design patterns go back to the 1970s when the first people were talking about design patterns, but it was really the Gang of Four, encouraged by Ward Cunningham, to say, okay, let's start formalizing the way that we code. At the same time, there was a group in Germany trying to do the same thing, but the Germans were a little bit slower than the people in the US, so the Gang of Four is a little bit more famous. If you Google design patterns, you will find them and not the Germans. And basically what happened after the Gang of Four published their book, it became the standard way of coding, especially in like C#, Java. I bet that the guys who are running the product in Lumby, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you do something to the service tier, say I'm going to use a proxy, and you can actually use the terminology that those guys invented. And what we try to do with the design patterns is we're going to do the same with NAV, right? We're going to formally name the things that we've been doing for a long time, and we're going to label it, so it's going to be easier to talk about it. Once you label something, it's also easier to say, with this version, the design pattern is going to change, or with this version, we're going to introduce a new design pattern because we changed the framework. So the Gang of Four started with their patterns. I think they were like 23 design patterns, very low-level stuff, C++ design patterns. And inspired on that, other people were starting to create more design patterns, object-oriented design patterns. But you don't need to be an object-oriented development language to have design patterns. Design patterns are best practices. And you can have best practices in Fortran, and COBOL, and Pascal, and AL, right? So people started to write general design patterns for any programming language. If you see where the Navision design patterns are, we do have overlap. If you go through the list of design patterns, you will recognize that we actually have a bunch of design patterns that we inherit from the Gang of Four. At least we try to inherit a name. I'm going to talk about the singleton pattern. And the singleton pattern is something which is very common to a C# or C++ developer. And the advantage of using the same name in NAV is that if you as a Navision partner onboard a guy that just comes from university, they will know what a singleton pattern is. So if you explain to them how to do a singleton in NAV, they will say, oh, well, I know what you mean, I can do that, But if you give it a different name, then it's going to confuse people. It's the same with Navision and SQL. SQL Server calls a key an index. And if you don't know that, you have a Navision developer talking about keys. And you have a SQL Server expert like, key? A key? You mean an index, So if you have the same name, it makes it easier to communicate. But of course, the Navision design patterns are, we have our own patterns. We are a programming language that are designed for database access, for ERP systems. We have flow fields and stuff like that. And because we have our own things, we also have our own design patterns that are very specific to NAV. So this is a list of the Gang of Four design patterns. And the only reason I show it here is to tell you that we have a couple of design patterns that we inherit, right? But even a lot of Gang of Four design patterns are now obsolete. These patterns were created in 1995 before .NET came around with the garbage collector and things like that. So design patterns are common solutions to solve problems. They are very much formalized for object-oriented programming. And basically what we try to do with design patterns is we try to formalize the typical things to do with NAV. It's basically, if you hire a new guy to do Navision, this is basically what you will learn them. You will teach them the Navision language, the Navision typical things, and that's what we try to do with design patterns. And while we are at it, because we are moving away from like trying to hard code everything, we are trying to implement some object-oriented programming concepts to kind of try to decouple all the changes that we are doing in the base product, so we don't have to merge all the time, right? So why use design patterns? Basically, you avoid reinventing the wheel. You are doing something that you know that works. You don't have to be afraid that you break the service tier. You don't have to be afraid that you run into a performance issue, because the code that you're using uses a structure that was designed to do what it wants to do. It's a proven standard, so it makes it easier to maintain the code. It becomes a common language. We can stand at the coffee machine and say, let's create a new table and use the singleton pattern, and we'll both know what we talk about. And of course, that makes us more productive, right? And more productive means happier customers and easier maintenance. One thing which with design patterns to remember is that it's always work in progress. Whenever the guys from Fargo and Lundby come up with new platform possibilities, we have to look at our design patterns and say, is this still true? Is this still the best way of doing things? It basically happened to hooks. We talked about hooks 6 years ago to decouple your code from the base code. And then the platform guys said, oh, now we have events. And when the events came around, we had to rethink the way we do design patterns. And we said, okay, let's switch to events if that's possible. Right? And now we're going to move to Visual Studio Code, and with Visual Studio Code we got a whole new list of native AL types, and that's probably going to change a lot of best practices as well. So what do you think is a typical design pattern in NAV? What is a thing which is so typical to NAV that if a customer asks you to make a modification, you will never even consider doing it in your own way. You will just do it in the Navision way. You remember the example, Anthony? No? The example that I always like to use is number series. Number series is something that has been with us in the product for a very long time. It's actually, when I bought Navision as an end user 20 years ago, the sales guy said, Mark, I have to show you this. We have a cool new feature in Navision. It's called number series. And with number series, you can prefix your numbers, and when the new posting year comes, you can actually reset your invoice numbers, you know. And number series became one of these things that's very common to NAV. And when you implement your own table and you want to have some numbering, it's very common for you to actually implement this pattern. But how do you do that? How do you explain to a developer, especially when they are new to the product, how to do it, right? Most people, when they try to figure something out, they reverse engineer, right? They debug, they look at the code. And that was easy in Navision Financials 2.6, right? But now if you give a new developer an NAV 2017 code base, it's a lot of lines of code, right? And how do you expect a new guy to figure out what is good and what is bad in so many lines of code? And I think this is also a real true advantage of design patterns, is because with a design pattern, you can go into a book or into a help file or to MSDN. And MSDN will actually tell you step by step how to implement the design pattern, right? And if you look at number series actually fits on one PowerPoint slide, ish. If you implement the pattern, you need a number field. The number field needs to have 20 characters. If you have less, you have chances of overflow. If you have more, nothing will happen, but it's weird. You also need to have a field in the table which is called number series. This is a confusing field, because this field doesn't show up anywhere in the Navision UI, right? What does this field do? Why do we have a number series field in the item table and the customer table if it doesn't show up in the user interface? Why is it there? What reason do we have to put it there?
Well, points at where the numbers are.
Yeah, the only reason why we have it is if a user makes a mistake and they pick the wrong number series, they go to their administrator and say, what did I do wrong? And the administrator can zoom into the record. Does it work in the web client? I don't know. And they can say, oh, you picked the wrong number series. The field only exists for troubleshooting purposes. But if you don't document it, it's very confusing, you know. And we actually use it when we call into the code unit. We need some code snippets. One of the code snippets is this one. This is called assist edit. If you create a function in an AV, do you think calling the function assist edit is a smart way of calling a function? What does it mean? If you look at a function called assist edit, what do you think? It's a trigger, right? It's something that the system generates. I think a better name would be look up linked number series from a page, right? Because that's actually what the function is indicating. I think this is also one of the main characteristics of a design pattern. And this may be true for an AV more than any other programming language because we have so much legacy. Sometimes you implement a design pattern for an AV and you feel that this can be done more efficiently, right? But this code, this design pattern was created based on Navision Financials 1.3. And with Navision Financials 1.3, we didn't have variants, we didn't have record references, right? Design patterns is not always about programming with the latest and greatest features. Design patterns is programming in such a way that somebody else will understand your code and maintain your code. I can write this in a smarter way. I can rewrite this and this will probably only be one line of code, right? With the features we have today. But if I do that and you are going to maintain my code, you are going to be the one that says, why, this guy was drunk. Well, I didn't go to the party yesterday, so I'm not drunk, right? So design patterns are not always about the smartest way, and it's basically the responsibility of Microsoft to say, okay, it's time to refactor this, and after they have done it, we actually have to go in and change our code as well, right? And it needs to be formally communicated by Microsoft that the pattern has changed, right? And there are some changes to number series, because in NAV 2017, on most of the master data and documents, the design pattern is not published in the user interface if it doesn't make any sense to show the number series, right? Unfortunately, that change was not communicated. Anyway, right. So another design pattern which is very typical to